Infant life support systems in an intensive care unit suddenly sound an alarm. An airliner's compass mysteriously swings off course. An electric wheelchair spins out of control. What's the connection? We asked Roberta Baskin to investigate this growing high-tech phenomenon, which is scaring even the experts. Roberta?
Connie, whoever thought that you could trigger a hospital emergency by dialing your cell phone? Well, these wireless goodies are loaded with gremlins and can cause mayhem. We live in a sea of electromagnetic energy.
877-10-4.
You can't see it, but it's everywhere, and few of us ever stop to consider its consequences. Cellular telephones, CD players, computers, two-way radios, TVs, all emit waves of energy, like radio waves. And when the waves collide, for example, when this radio gets too close to this computer, you get electromagnetic interference, EMI.
We ask that you do not use portable electronic devices such as tape players, audio-video recorders, or players during taxi takeoff and landing.
If you've flown recently, you were probably warned about EMI.
Portable telephones cannot be used at any time on board the aircraft.
Ever wonder why?
We were on a climb out from our departure airport, and the first thing that I saw was a red flag popped up down in the lower left-hand corner.
Airline officials don't want to talk about EMI, but Denny Pistol will. For more than 25 years, he's been a pilot for one of the nation's biggest airlines. He was at the controls of a 727 when one after another, the compass, bearing, and distance measuring instruments all failed. You're talking about losing your navigational equipment.
That's correct. That was exactly what happened, and we lost it on both systems, the primary and the backup, almost instantaneously. If we were in bad weather and dependent on our own navigation, the odds of coming out of that successfully would have been very, very diminished.
You could have crashed.
We could have crashed.
How did you figure out what was going on?
It was about that time that our flight service manager from the cabin came up, and she said, "We have a big problem back here."
The problem was some passengers playing a radio, just a radio. When they turned the radio off, did your instrumentation come back?
All of the instrumentation restored back to normal.
Perfectly normal.
Perfectly normal.
There have been more than 100 incidents of electromagnetic interference, EMI, reported by pilots, most anonymously. Several pilots report straying off course, one 13 miles off course, and suspects passengers playing electronic games are to blame. Another reports missing his landing approach twice.
When you see it firsthand, it really does make you a believer.
Automakers also are believers. They struggle with such problems as windshield wipers turning on and off, car doors locking, cruise control speeding up, all because of interference. The biggest concern is safeguarding airbags and anti-lock brakes. Chrysler, for example, is spending $20 million at this lab to test and shield cars against EMI. But some of our most important electronic devices aren't well protected. Hospitals are finding out, often by accident, that interference with medical equipment can be life-threatening.
All the lights came on just like that.
Susan Ill never heard of EMI until it affected her son, Chris. He depends on a ventilator 24 hours a day. But one day, while driving home from the hospital, the ventilator alarm sounded wildly.
The whole machine just went haywire, and we didn't know why.
It wasn't until several months later, when it happened again, that Susan figured out that it was her cell phone that was triggering the problem.
I hung up the phone, and everything went back to normal again. When I take Christopher with me, I do not turn my phone on anymore. Twice is enough for me. There.
The babies in this intensive care unit also depend on ventilators for every breath. But nurses at Arkansas Children's Hospital got a scare when alarms on all 5 ventilators went off at once. Immediately, all available staff had to help the babies breathe by hand.
So we'd have to jump up and attend to the patient and make sure they were getting enough oxygen and getting breaths.
Nurse Carol Winans was in charge the day the alarm sounded.
It created chaos.
Like this.
We had no idea what it was.
It took 4 days to figure out interference from a shuttle bus radio was the cause. At Indiana's St. Margaret Mercy, wireless monitors in the cardiac unit suddenly went haywire. It was tracked down to two-way radios miles away. That interference problem led hospital staff to look for others.
Here it goes right now.
Like a cell phone that can cause a ventilator to malfunction. A two-way radio that can shut down this drug infusion pump. And watch how a flip phone can trick this incubator into suddenly heating up without warning. And hospital personnel scrambled at Eastern Maine Medical Center when an alarm for the purified air system was set off by a security guard's two-way radio. A hospital director, Ron Gregory, sent out an alert on his computer bulletin board. There were responses from all over the world.
England, France, a lot of the United States. In Norway, it is now common that the use of cellular phones are not permitted inside hospital buildings.
I thought, gee, maybe our equipment is affected too.
In New Jersey, emergency medical technician Jan Walitsky got the message and tried an experiment of his own. He turned on his two-way radio near his defibrillator, a critical care device that shocks the heart during cardiac arrest.
Check pulse. And as you see, the defibrillator told me to check the patient's pulse. It did not charge up the shock.
When he showed the experiment to us, the defibrillator failed about half the time.
It wouldn't have shocked the patient, and the patient who might have been able to be saved would not have been saved.
In fact, the Food and Drug Administration knows of 6 reported cases where electromagnetic interference is believed to have caused defibrillators to fail. There are more than 100 reported incidents involving all kinds of medical devices, including 5 suspected deaths.
Manufacturers of these devices are increasingly aware of the potential for problems, and they're doing a considerable amount of research.
And the FDA is also doing research. Dr. Bruce Burlington oversees the testing. Virtually all electronic medical devices are susceptible to interference. But so far, the FDA has set standards for only a handful of devices.
We're certainly looking at equipment like respirators, equipment like pacemakers, and equipment like powered wheelchairs, where if something goes wrong, it obviously has potential tremendous impact on the person who's relying on that device.
This is where we were just going up.
You don't have to tell that to Jim Hill. He's a Korean War veteran living just outside of Denver. He took us back to the scene of a wheelchair accident that almost killed him.
What was the first clue that there was something that wasn't quite right?
The clicky noise. Just started making a clicky noise, and all of a sudden the wheelchair just did a completely 180, just like this.
By itself?
Just by itself. And I just took off, and I was just going so fast, and I went...
Right off here?
Right off here.
And how far a drop is that?
I'd say probably 15, 18 feet. The wheelchair tipped like this, then I went down first, and the wheelchair came down, lit on top of my chest. Then I just went tumbling down there.
And you were critically injured?
They thought I was dead. I did too.
You still have real strong memories of that
every
moment?
night. I have nightmares every night. Goes off a cliff.
It's not clear what happened to Jim Hill. It may have been interference from nearby transmission towers or from somewhere else. What is clear is that there have been several cases of wheelchairs spinning out of control, prompting the FDA to conduct its own tests.
That wheelchair is not being controlled any way except by the radio frequency interference from that handheld radio.
The FDA has now told manufacturers to make electric wheelchairs resistant to EMI. Although Jim Hill has a new chair, he's still wary.
No matter how safe they say that they are, I just don't. I don't think I'll ever have a trust and forget.
It's no wonder Jim Hill is fearful. There's so much that's not known about electromagnetic interference, except that our greater reliance on electronic devices almost guarantees more problems. So what's being done? Well, some manufacturers are adding warnings to their product literature. Others are looking for better ways to shield devices from interference, as the car manufacturers have done. But in the meantime, some hospitals, like the airlines, are already banning cell phones. So, Connie, this is something that we're going to be hearing a lot more about.
All right, thank you, Roberta. Coming up, one of the biggest stars in Hollywood and the littlest star in the NBA.